Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Is it up? Good morning, everybody. Make sure it's on, right? Good morning, everybody. All right, there we go. Welcome to Houston Oasis. My name is Alexis Potaman. I am your MC for today. We're really excited to have you here. I like to start every meeting off with a couple of our core values that you can see behind me here. Today I want to highlight reality is known through reason and human hands solve human problems. We've got a really great lineup for you today. We'll have a couple of songs from Sam Robbins, and our main speaker today is Hemant Mehta. So let's go ahead and get this morning started with a couple of songs.
Hello. How's it going? Are you okay if I swear? There's a little swear in this song. Is it okay? This is not normally what I would start a 10:30 a.m. show off with, but you guys seem like you might actually like this song. Because this is pretty interesting. I live in Nashville, and I'm just here for the weekend, and I wrote this song sort of thinking about the ways that I graduated college and I moved to Nashville, and I realized that everybody is just making life up, and the world is sort of built up around us in ways that don't make sense. So yeah, and I made a t-shirt with the chorus lyric on it. It was my most popular piece of merch by 100 billion miles, so I guess there's something to it. For a while I thought that I'd missed my shot, and by the time I turned 25, everybody would have forgotten about me and my story, my songs and who I am. I'd fade into obscurity, another guitar playing white man. I used to stand at the kitchen table and see the Rolling Stone cover stars who just turned 21, 6 or 7 Grammys in their arms. And that world seems so far from me, graduating college at 23, while they're off living their dreams. They must be so happy. Oh, but maybe it's all bullshit. Nobody knows what they're doing. And if I had millions of dollars or a million more fans, it wouldn't change a thing about who I am. And now I see it in the faces of my friends and my mom. Time takes everything. There's no use trying to hold on. But that doesn't stop some people from trying to cheat the clock, as if chasing after youth isn't just a lifetime of mourning. Oh, well, maybe it's all bullshit. Nobody knows what they're doing. And if I had millions of dollars or a Botox injection, it wouldn't change a thing about who I am. I'm just a man born and bred in New Hampshire, blonde hair, 6'1 3/4. I'm not my songs, no. I'm not a brand, no. I'm not an image. Yes, I see that it's all I had millions of dollars and everything I thought I wanted, it wouldn't change a thing. No, it wouldn't change a thing, babe. It wouldn't change a thing about who I am. Thanks. Thanks. I'm gonna do one more song and then we're gonna get on with the real events of the day. I'm gonna do a song that I put out on an album that came out a little over a month ago, and it's probably my favorite song on the album. And it was, I'm from New England, and I used to play a lot of horrible bar gigs. You know, nobody in my family did music, so I just played open mics at the bar, and then I ended up playing like every bar gig in New England, and I met really interesting people doing that, and that was sort of the start of this song. It's called Hard to Hate. I was booked at a biker bar upstate. It was leather jackets and guns on hips. I whipped in my dad's red Prius. I was stuffed in a corner singing Fire and Rain when a Hell's Angel spun towards me. As he was limping over, I swore I was about to die. Then we talked for 20 minutes about his favorite songs from Sweet Baby James. His voice got softer and softer. It's pretty hard to hate someone when they're right in front of you. It's so easy to fall in love when you take the close-up view. When it's not a screen, it's a face, it's a heart, it's a name. It gets pretty hard to hate 'em when you can really see the flame, the fire behind everyone's pain. I was booked at a bright pink bachelorette where they wished I was a stripper, and drunk women barking, won't you play Michael Bublé? I picked his saddest one just to be rude, but much to my surprise, one by one they started slowing down. And for 2 whole hours we sang and laughed as we watched the walls come down. We all followed each other on Instagram. It's pretty hard to hate someone when they're right in front of you. It's so easy to fall in love when you take the close-up view. When it's not a screen, it's a face, it's a heart, it's a name. It gets pretty hard to hate when you can really see the flame, the fire behind everyone's pain. I gave Kathy a bag of chips by the side of the road. I saw the scars on her face as she said, did you know that I used to be somebody? Well, I used to be somebody. It's pretty hard to hate someone when they start to look like you. It's so easy to fall in love when their face reflects the truth that you can never quite escape. Good luck fighting off the flame. That fire always remains. it's all the same thing. Do-do-do-da-da-da-da-da. Do-do-do-da-da-da-da-da. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that's it for me for now.
Thank you so much. All right. Our main speaker today is Hemant Mehta. He is the founder and editor of friendlyatheist.com, a YouTube creator and podcast co-host. He has appeared on CNN and Fox News and written multiple books, including I Sold My Soul on eBay and The Young Atheist Survival Guide. He also edited the book Queer Disbelief, and it is a contributor at onlysky.com. His talk today is titled Why I'm Optimistic About the Future of Atheist Activism. So please help me welcome to the mic, Hemant Mehta.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Thank you so much for being here. How many people, this is your first time at a Houston Oasis event? Few people. Thank you for coming. If you're watching online, if you're here, please consider becoming members, donating. I appreciate them bringing me out here. What I want to talk to you about might seem strange because it seems like there's not a ton to be optimistic about. I grant that. But we're going to zoom out a little bit and see how things, especially, how many of you have been atheists, aware of the atheist movement in some way or another for like 10 years or more? A lot of people. So you may have seen some of these changes that I want to talk about. I'll just give you a really brief summary of where I'm coming from on all this. I became an atheist when I was a teenager. That's like mid-1990s in terms of internet age. And in my case, it was starting to ask a lot of questions, realizing that I could go online and try to search for those answers in my own privacy, waiting until like my parents went to bed so I could use AOL dial-up late at night. And there was no, I don't think there was Google. I don't think there were a lot of good ways to search, which meant everything you found, if you were questioning religion, I did not know the word atheism, you just found like shady websites written by dudes clearly living in a basement somewhere. And some of that seemed to make sense to me. And the more I started questioning that stuff, the more sense it made. By the time I got to college, I had the chance to actually start a group, get involved with some of the national groups that constitute organized atheism. So here's the weird thing about that. We're talking now like early 2000s. So you can imagine my surprise in the mid-2000s when it seems like atheism, or at least new atheism, is like everywhere. It seemed to have gone mainstream. People were talking about these things that I only saw in chat rooms or random shady websites somewhere. And then what's weird is that several years later, it seemed to have basically gone away. And I was trying to figure out, is there a way to quantify any of this? Let's see if we can get this to work. Magic. Why isn't this moving? All right, we'll figure this out. Can I get help with this by any chance? I am not sure. I just want to go to the next thing. All right, I'll just do that too. While you're figuring that out, here's what I tried to do to try to quantify this. Google has a thing called Google Trends where you could see how much a phrase has been used online or searched for as long back as you want to go. So I basically put in there new atheists. Let's see if we could see this in just a moment. That seems to be working. Thank you. So if you could see this, you can't see color. That's okay. This is a graph of the searches for new atheists since 2006. So if 2006 was the peak on the far left, you could see that and on the far right, we're at today. You could see that over time, it kind of goes in these little spurts, but there's this downhill trend. No one's really searching for new atheists online. but that's one phrase. Maybe that's an unfair thing to say. So here's a second thing. There we go. This is new atheism. Same idea, but you can see the trend lines are the exact same. It's not a one-off. But okay, that's not fair. That's a phrase. What about atheism itself? Is that any different? Here's what won't surprise you. More people are searching for atheism than any specific brand of it. Fine. But check this out. Whoa, where are we? Go back. One slide. I don't know what's going on anymore. No, it's okay. It's there. It's there. You can see on here, atheism is at the top of everything by a long shot, but also over time, fewer people are searching for it online. So it seems like whatever moment we had like 15 years ago or so seems to be fading in relevance in terms of people looking for the stuff online. And again, we can have long debates and analyze why all this may be the case. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Maybe it's so ubiquitous that like people just kind of don't need to search for it as much anymore. But it seems like that's not necessarily good for our movement in big quote hands. So let me give you a couple more like anecdotal pieces of evidence here. At the height of the new atheism movement, you could see a ton of books hitting mainstream bestsellers lists about atheism. I got this screenshot from Amazon looking specifically in the atheism category like a couple weeks ago. And I know it's hard to see the individual books, but here's what you can find if you like look at these items. These are the top 20 best-selling books about atheism on some random day. And here's what you'll find. About half of them are the new atheist books from like circa 2006. A couple of them are Christian rebuttals to those that got flagged in the atheism category. Someone's in for a surprise. A couple of them are new books put out by Seth Andrews, who spoke earlier. Like, it's a new book, so of course more people are interested in it now. The question is, will it have staying power? That's true of any new book. But by and large, if you figured out that you're an atheist and you were curious about it and you wanted to buy a book and learn more about it, let's say, these are the most popular books on the subject today. And most of them come from more than 10 years ago, which means the people who are new into our world are still having atheism defined by those people from like 15 or so years ago. And some of that is fine. It may just be superficial level kind of arguing about God's existence. Some of it, I would argue, doesn't hold up well. But the point is, we haven't really moved past this. If you look for books about Christianity in the same way, like what are the most popular books about Christianity, the vast majority are going to be books that just came out, because of course they would be. That's what people want to buy today. It's the news stuff. That's not the case for our world. Here's another anecdotal thing. This is the Reason Rally from 2012. It was billed as like the largest gathering of atheists in Washington, in the country's history. This was in Washington, D.C. I think that's Richard Dawkins speaking right there. But there were an estimated like 20,000 plus people, and this got massive media coverage. There were big names who were speaking on that stage. It was a pretty big thing. I've met a ton of people whose first experience meeting other atheists, and if you're part of this group, you know how powerful that can be when you don't have to censor yourself, when you get to meet people who've gone through similar experiences. A lot of people said this was the first sort of thing like that they've ever done, and it changed their life for the better. That's awesome. They tried doing this again in 2016. This is the same, it's a different spot. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but the number of people who were there, not nearly as much. And again, we could have long talks about why that might be the case, but it seemed like our peak had, again, already passed. People are not as interested as they used to be. And I'll give you one more thing. There used to be a time when all the new atheist stuff was happening that you would see a lot of debates and discussions about atheism in mainstream newspapers, on cable news, things like that. If religion came up in the news cycle for any reason, like news shows would call atheists saying, hey, we need someone to represent that side. I know. But that happened all the time on Fox News and the like, where they're like, yes, let's bring an atheist on and we'll discuss this. And like Bill O'Reilly had Silverman on and they did the tide goes in, tide goes out, stuff like that. Guess what? They don't do that anymore. Like none of the news shows really, they don't call up atheists to talk about anything. Fox News, you would think, would be very interested in having a combative atheist on any program. They realize they could talk about us. They don't need us there for it. If you've seen anything about atheism in the news at all, it's probably like the Ronald Reagan Freedom from Religion Foundation commercial on a couple news shows. But that's paid advertising. They're not asking people to come on there necessarily. And one last thing is, I came up in this movement on websites, writing blogs, things like that. And I'm just telling you, blogs are not really a thing anymore. People are not reading that stuff. People aren't reading, period. But they're not really reading blogs. They're not necessarily looking at certain news sources at all, which means any way we had to bring together as many people as possible, and it's not unique to us, but that's a lot harder to do because everyone has their own social media bubbles and news outlets and things like that. So, and also I would argue it's hard to do that sort of thing all the time when it's a passion project. And as anyone who's done any sort of hobby knows, like unless at some point your hobby becomes a career, it's hard to sustain that for a really long time. So anyway, that's the depressing part of this talk. So after all that, the question is, what do we have to be optimistic about when it seems like things are not going that well for our movement, especially if you think spreading atheism really means spreading critical thinking and spreading reason, and that's a thing we all want to do at some level. And this is where I think there's reason to be optimistic. So I want to give you like 3 reasons things are actually getting better in the long term, things that suggest we're actually heading in a good direction. And the first has to do with the demographics. It looks like all the numbers seem to be moving in our direction. So this is a graph from the Pew Research Center, and it basically shows at the top bar that you can see there are the percentage of people who describe themselves as Christians in the country, starting in 2007 all the way to today. That number is going lower and lower. The bar in the middle there, in the light blue, from 16% to almost double, 29% today, that's the non-religious group. These are the people that subscribe to no organized religion. Some of them are atheists and agnostics. A lot of them are just like, I want nothing to do with organized religion at all. And the thing is, every time any of these type of big polling research organizations puts out any survey like this, the trend lines keep going in this direction. The question is not like, are these two ever going to cross paths? Will the non-religious ever outnumber Christians? The question is, what year is that going to happen? That is a huge sea change for like the way we think about religion in our country, that more and more people want less and less to do with organized religion. And again, I want to stress, with that non-religious group, that 29%, a lot of them believe in some higher power, but they've seen what organized religion does, and they want nothing to do with it. So that's interesting to think about. Here's another interesting graph. This is from sociologist Ryan Burge, but basically this is the number of people who are non-religious by age group. And at the very bottom there, that's the greatest generation, the older generation. And you could see, starting on the left side, that's like 1975-ish, it's really low. Older people tend to be more religious generationally. But look what happens over time to today. Even the oldest Americans are slowly becoming non-religious. But then look, the next one. I'm sorry, that's the greatest generation. You have the silent generation, roughly in the same direction. The one in the middle there, the dark solid line, that's the boomers. Again, going up in that direction. The curvy one at the top is Generation X. Again, heading up in terms of non-religiosity. So, with that in mind, the question is, okay, what about the younger generations? What about millennials? The people who are like 18 to 30, somewhere in there, where are they on this chart? Here's where they're at, if this works. Yay! Look at that. They're like, they have to extend the y-axis to fit the millennials on this chart because imagine what they've been through. I mean, it's hard to analyze this because, again, a million different factors here, but younger people have grown up in a country where they've seen so many instances, I would argue, of religion being used as the inspiration to do really horrible things. And it's not that weird. If you go to like a larger public high school, it's not that weird anymore to know someone who's non-religious. Like, it's like finding someone in your high school who's gay. Depending on where you live, I know it varies, but by and large, most high schoolers know someone who's LGBTQ. Most high schoolers know someone who's non-religious, and the response is generally like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, it's just not that big of a deal, which makes it easier for more people to say, I'm non-religious too. So, like, this stuff goes on top of itself. This stuff escalates over time. So that's fascinating. Here's a more recent one that I found also really interesting. This is a question that asks, what percent of people say, I believe God exists, and I'm 100% sure of it? Like, I have absolute certainty that God exists. If you read The God Delusion back in the day, Dawkins talked about like a spectrum of like 1 to 7. 1 meant you are 100% certain of God's existence, which is not a thing you could do. That's why it's called faith. You've got to take some of it on faith. But there were people who called themselves a 1. And then 7, he said, would be someone who absolutely knows God does not exist. And the point he was making is even he would put himself at like a 6, because you can't go that far. And then he was like, all right, maybe a 6.9, fine. But the question is, you can't go on the extremes, because you can't know for sure any of this stuff. So where are you? This is really asking who's a 1. How many people are a 1? And on the far left, this is 1988. That number is like 60-some%, if you could see that dot up there on the far left. And check out where they're at now. Whoa, come back. Magic. We'll make this work. Yay. Check that out. 2021, for the first time ever, that number dipped below 50%. So more than half the country is no longer certain of God's existence. So interesting to think about, like, what's happening, because we're not talking about atheists anymore. We're talking about a lot of religious people who have at least some doubt. And as many of you probably know, if you have that little seed of doubt, it's probably going to grow over time. So, why is all of this happening? Why do all these trends seem to be going in our direction, even though the world seems to be going in a very different place? I talked about a couple of the reasons, but I think one of the biggest ones, the biggest reason so many people stayed religious, even if they had doubts about God, is there is this belief that believing in God, being a believer, being religious, is synonymous with being a good person. And again, if you look over the past couple of decades, whether it's politically, in terms of social change or whatever, you've seen religion on the wrong side of so many important issues. Phil Zuckerman is a sociologist. He wrote this article at Salon. I just clipped one paragraph from it. But check out what this thing says. I'll read this for you here because I think it's really important to realize here. In terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable health care for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, trans rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, the government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, the correlation remains. The most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. And I don't know if you could see this here. Every single one of those things is linked to some survey specifically talking about those issues. Again, think about this. No matter where you are on the religious spectrum, you probably care about some of these things, certainly more than others, but it seems like no matter what the issue is, big cultural issue, the most conservative religious organizations, groups in the country are usually on the heartless side of the matter. Here's a couple of these right here. This is, nope, that's not the one. There we go. There we go. This is abortion rights by religion. And check this out. At the very bottom there, you have like Jehovah's Witnesses. They're the very light blue thing. That's saying very few of them support abortion rights for women. The darker line in the middle is like the US average. And the question is your religion less likely to support abortion rights, that's near the bottom, or more likely to support abortion rights at the top? Where are atheists on this list? We're over there. We're actually losing. Can you see who we're losing to? Unitarian Universalists. They are more supportive of abortion rights than we are. But the point is, overwhelmingly, people who are non-religious or less conservative in their religious beliefs are more likely to support abortion rights for women, which, you can argue, we're talking about you support health care for people. So, again, if you care about that issue, non-religiosity seems to be on the moral side of the spectrum. Here's another thing right here. This is when it comes to basically trans rights. Do you believe gender is like determined at birth? And you could see here, white evangelicals, 84% of white evangelicals say it's determined at birth, basically saying trans people don't exist. Whereas at the very, like the group that is least likely to believe that are atheists with 29%. So again, when it comes to trans rights right now, atheists are on the side of supporting trans people, conservative religious groups, not so much. And we could play this game for a while here. Death penalty. Who supports the death penalty, which there are countless stories at this point of people who were executed by the government who were later found to have not done the thing they were said to do. Hey, guess what? You live in Texas. Who supports the death penalty? White evangelicals, 75% of them support the death penalty to some level. Atheists are 35%. So there's atheists on the list down there. Least likely to support execution by the government. And also, this is just an interesting one. This is a survey that came out in early 2021, basically saying, hey, guess what? There's a vaccine for COVID. Are you gonna get it? When it was still not everyone had the opportunity to go get it. And again, think about what a vaccine means. You're not just taking care of yourself, you're making it harder for the virus to jump from one person to another. It's really saying, do you care about your community to try to prevent the transmission of a virus? So who's more likely to get the vaccine for COVID? And atheists, 90% of atheists said, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get the shot when I can get the shot. 54% of white evangelicals said the same thing. And this is back in the day before all the anti-vax stuff started coming up to the surface. So the point is, it doesn't matter what the issue is. It seems like if you're looking for arguably the moral side of so many of these things, that gives more rights to people, that makes life more tolerable, more inclusive of different people, you're gonna, like, it's the non-religious people. We are quickly becoming the moral majority. It's happening. The one thing the Christian right used to have leverage over is, of course you gotta take your kids to church. How else are they gonna get a moral education? Guess what? They're not getting a moral education. And if you have gay friends, if you have people who are suffering from healthcare, things like that, and you want to see them get help and be included and have rights, if you go to a lot of conservative churches, certainly white evangelical, Southern Baptist, certain Catholic churches, you're not going to find the support and help over there for anything that they do right. And there are things they do really well. These issues are not on that list. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Like, we have, a lot of times when you look at surveys, it's been annoying because years ago, we couldn't find any information about who we are. There were relatively few of us, and we would always be an asterisk in all of those surveys because they just didn't have enough of us to get a sense of who we are as a community. That is changing too. So we're starting to find out a lot more about who we are, to the point where different groups, this is from American Atheists, they were able to survey like tens of thousands of atheists just to get a sense. It's not necessarily the same type of scientific survey, but they can ask a lot of people, we want to know where you stand on these issues, and they've put out research on this stuff. This is another group, this is from the University of Kent in the UK. They're like throwing tons of money at researchers, giving them grants to figure out who are these people? Who are these non-religious people? How are they becoming non-religious? What are they doing with their non-religiosity? Because in terms of studying sociology and how we communicate and interact, we're fascinating to a lot of researchers, which is great. More people are going to learn about who we are, what that means. And one of the arguments, and Houston Oasis knows this really well, is how many of you have had this question like, you're an atheist. Someone finds out you're an atheist. Okay, but what does that mean? What do you believe in if you don't believe in God? And that's the sort of thing people want to know. Like, if you're an atheist, does that translate to something? Humanism does. Atheism kind of left that question open, but people are starting to learn from an academic level what that means for society. It's changing so quickly. I'm going to do my little cheap plug right here, which is I now write for a site called onlysky.media, and basically the premise of this site is you don't need bloggers or writers trying to tell you why God doesn't exist. The resources are out there, the books are out there. If you want to learn about it, it's not hard to find things. But once you are an atheist, what do you care about? What do you think about the world around us? Not just about the God question, not just about politics, but about grief, about raising a family, about dealing with the world around you. Those are questions that basically go unexplored on a lot of the new atheism books and things like that. The whole site was created on the premise that let's not have to prove to people that God doesn't exist. Let's just use that as a default and then go from there. So if you're interested, onlysky.media is the site. There's a lot of content on there that's really, really interesting. And I'm saying this as someone who's like lived and worked in the online world for a long time now. There's articles on that site I've never seen on atheist blogs or other academic articles, or certainly not in the popular atheism books. So if you're looking for something, onlysky.media is that site. So here's the good thing about all of this. One of the good news that I want to share with you, let me spread the good news, is that we're moving past the word atheist. Like, the focus of activism is not just on arguments for atheism or acceptance of atheists or overcoming anti-atheist bias. I mean, those things are important, but it's more about, okay, we're here now. We've found community in different ways, however we want to. What do we do with that? What does that mean for the rest of our lives? What does that mean for the next generation? It's less about us and more about the world around us. It's fighting against religious bigotry and Christian nationalism, things that affect all of us. And the interesting thing about that is that a lot of religious people agree with us on all of this. Like, the atheism part of it is almost the least interesting thing about it. So that's a fascinating thing. And why does that happen? Why has that changed over the course of a couple decades here? That's the work of like generations of atheist activists, from like Madalyn Murray O'Hair all the way to groups like this that form communities that end up being built around more than just trying to disprove God's existence. That also means, I think a lot of the new atheism books, it's a lot of playing defense, trying to say, no, we're not bad people. No, we have logic and reason behind our atheism. That seems to be less important than ever, because we don't have to prove that anymore. The question is, okay, where do we go from here? So that's the first thing. All the demographic shifts are moving in our direction, fascinating in a really good way. Here's the second thing that I think is good news. And this is that, you know how many of you have been to like an atheist convention or gathering outside of Oasis? A handful of people. I don't know if you've noticed this. They are fewer in number, and they attract fewer attendees than they used to. And that almost seems like a bad thing, like there's less interest in our world. But this is what's interesting. Like, atheism, as I said, doesn't get a ton of media attention unless something specific happens. But what's amazing is that all that activism, all that energy, instead of being concentrated in a few areas, like this organization has a massive yearly convention, and that's fine, or there's some group that's doing some publicity stunt or something, it seems like the voices of atheism, whoever they are all over the place, and they attract a different audience and a different number of people than ever before. You don't have to go to one place if you want to hear someone making a case for atheism, and that's largely because instead of one group that kind of has to be the default atheist group, there are more groups that are really helpful to more people. Like, they target certain audiences. And I'll give you specifics, but I think of this like college. Like, no one says, oh, I'm going to go to college. No, it depends. The size of the college, the type of the college, what type of thing you want to major in. And every college is like, we're really good at this sort of student, so we want to attract those people to come to our place. It's like ordering a sandwich. You're not just going to walk into a store and say, give me a sandwich. You have specific needs, and they're going to cater to that. And that's a good thing, because that means everyone can find what they want somewhere. So for a long time, especially pre-internet, there were very few places to find information about atheism. Even in like the early 2000s, there were only a handful of groups that ever got any attention, a handful of people who represented atheism. Like, it was annoying. You would read any article about atheism in the news, they always quoted the same, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 people every single time. And to some extent, that is still happening today, because the reporters haven't gotten better at finding different people. But, and by the way, thank goodness for that. I'm glad those people existed, because I learned a lot from that. But one of the arguments I remember coming up in the world of organized atheism is, how come we're not attracting a different type of person? How come we're attracting so many white people? How come we're attracting so many men to all the stuff we're doing? And like, do we need to do something different to reach a different group of people? And you always had like some groups trying to be all things to all people. It's really hard to pull that off. And like, we could have debates about whether anyone did that really well. But let's be honest, atheists of color have different needs than atheists who are white. Younger atheists have different issues that they're dealing with than older atheists. And some of that is the growing pains of any movement, because some people are always going to feel like they're not being paid attention to. But I think it's also unfair to ask, like, Freedom from Religion Foundation, you have to do all things atheists for everybody because you're one of the largest groups out there. Like, they can't do it no matter how hard they try. People are going to be left out. But here's how that's changing. I'm going to show you this picture here. Does anyone know who the guy on the left is in this picture? Just raise your hand. Like, one hand. But here's the interesting thing. So his name on the left, that's Lloyd Evans. If you're a former Jehovah's Witness, I'm almost positive you know who that guy is. I've done this. When I get invited to parties like once every decade and I find someone who is a former Jehovah's Witness, I swear this has happened to me. I'm not making this up. It's like, you're a former Jehovah's Witness? Do you know who Lloyd is? And they're like, oh, you know who Lloyd is? I'm like, yes. Why? Because Lloyd is a former Jehovah's Witness whose entire YouTube channel is about discussing not really atheism so much as what the Jehovah's Witnesses are doing right now, what they're doing wrong, why they should be criticized, and like going through their weekly media things and saying, here's what they're pushing on all the Jehovah's Witnesses this week, here's what they're doing wrong. And if you're coming from that insular community, I'm telling you, that guy matters way more than Dawkins or Sam Harris or anyone like that. Because he speaks your language. He knows what you've been through. If you're not a former Jehovah's Witness, you probably don't know what it's like. You might know some of the beliefs, but you're not part of those rituals. You're not part of that community growing up. Same game. Do you know who this guy is? Raise your hand if you're familiar with him. Couple hands. What's his name? John DeLynn. And same deal. If you don't know, you may not know who he is, but if you're an ex-Mormon, almost everyone, I swear, like knows who this guy is because that's his thing. He left Mormonism. He knows the ins and outs of it. He speaks to people who are leaving Mormonism. He speaks about what the Mormon LDS Church is doing wrong, where they need to be criticized. Again, the people who are leaving Mormonism, it used to be that they would have to go to like atheist groups to get any sense of belonging and like people willing to say the Mormon Church is wrong. But now you have people who cater to your interests, and they know what the specifics are. They speak your language. This is not a criticism of Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins doesn't know what these people are talking about. He's not part of that community, so someone like him would not be appealing to a lot of people who are leaving the LDS Church. But John can. Same deal. This is a woman named Ellie who makes YouTube videos about fundamentalist Christianity. And there are so many people like her on YouTube who talk about their fundamentalist Christian upbringing. And again, if you're not familiar with them, it doesn't matter. Because I'm telling you, so many of these people have an audience who are deeply passionate about the things they talk about and what they do. There are so many people like this. I'm going to show you one more. This one has sound. Hopefully this will work. There is have you heard of this fundamentalist Christian preacher named John Piper? He's been around for a while. Very fire, brimstone-y, Calvinist type of preacher. His son, I believe Abraham, grew up in that world, and now he's not religious at all. And his thing is, he's really big on TikTok, where he talks about his religious upbringing. I want to play you one of those videos, but what I want you to pay attention to is how many references he makes that you might not be familiar with. Magic. Oh no. Can we get it to work? I don't know. Huh? Aw. See if we can get it to work. It's too fun not to let it go without a try. This is Abraham Piper.
My son had to wear a tie the other day, and I asked if he needed help. And of course, his answer was, I know how to tie a tie, Dad. Which was news to me, because he's never really had a reason to wear one. I remember exactly when and why I learned to tie a tie. I was 10, and I was going on a missions trip by myself. What's a missions trip, you ask? It's a white savior's evangelical vacation that other people pay for. And the org I was going with required dressing up on Sundays and whenever interacting with the public. Thus the need to tie my own tie. This requirement was alongside memorizing the KJV, not talking to girls, and running a mile every morning. Oh, guess where the mission trip was too? One of the darkest places on earth. Florida! That's right, 10-year-old me and my cohort of other pre-adolescents took the message of Jesus and his ghastly demise to Orlando. I mean, if I had to guess who was going to get bathed in the blood of the Lamb, I would put my money on Florida, man. Why am I even telling you this? It's not even a story. Tying a tie, mission trip, Florida. I don't know. Suffice it to say, I look dapper as fuck doing my DC Talk puppet shows. All right, this is getting way too niche. I gotta go.
References to DC Talk, bathing in the blood of Christ, wearing his tie, proselytizing, evangelizing to people in the middle of Florida. I mean, again, if his experiences don't match yours, doesn't matter, because a ton of people who have been through all that are watching that, and they see that, and it's like, this guy got out. This guy got out with his dad being who his dad is, and it helps them leave too. There are so many people like this where they have their followings. They don't have the numbers or popularity necessarily that some of those new atheist names have, but they have people who are listening and following, and it's all over the place. It's amazing how many voices like this have really used social media to their advantage to share their history, to share their thoughts about this stuff in a way that goes so much more in-depth than so many of the atheist resources a lot of us may have grown up with, which is fascinating. I would also add, if you've never done this before, you should give this a shot. There is, if any of you have been on Reddit at all, there is an atheism subreddit, which actually has like over 2 million members. And so it's a place where people can post memes and stories or news articles that have to do with atheism. But this is the thing I want to point out to you, because maybe you have not seen this. If you ever go on the website, there is a place near the top of the menu where it says X asterisk groups. EX, X asterisk groups. And if you click on that, there's another menu that pops up, because there are like subreddits if you're an ex-Mormon, if you're an ex-Jew, an ex-Jehovah's Witness, an ex-Scientologist. There are separate forums for all these different groups. And if you ever get a chance to explore them, it is just fascinating. Like, you get to see, oh, this is the drama going on in the XJW world. This is what all the Mormons are talking about this week. It's so interesting to check out all that stuff. And again, this is not a knock on the books, but like the God Delusion, one of the criticisms of the God Delusion is that it painted religion with a very broad brush. But it had to. It's a book meant for the widest possible audience. It can't go in depth about much of anything. It kind of tackles religion at a surface level. But everyone I'm showing you, all these forums, they dig deep into the weeds of all these religions because they grew up with it. They know the specifics. They now can talk to people about why that stuff doesn't make sense in a way that is so much more impactful and personal, which is just fascinating. Even beyond that, there are groups that are interesting. This is Ex-Muslims of North America. It's a nonprofit. It's a group that is specifically trying to help former Muslims. There is a group called Footsteps. This is for former Orthodox Jews. A lot of them in New York right now. And again, none of this is a knock on larger nonprofits, but they can't cater to everybody. They can't, no matter how much they try. So the amazing thing is there are so many more voices, so many more people who don't always look the same, who are talking about things that are directly appealing to people who left religion. That is a huge change from what it used to be. And that is a big difference. And then, I mean, this is totally personal bias here, but like between podcasters and YouTubers and like TikTok theologians, there are all these new ways for more people to hear about atheism and start challenging their own religious beliefs than we ever had 15, 20 years ago at the height of the new atheism. So like, that's an amazing, amazing thing. And it also means there's a lot more nuance in talking about religion, which was also one of the big criticisms several years ago. Like, not all religions are the same. Some of them mean well. Some of them just believe in the supernatural. You can't treat them the same way you do really harmful, large organizations. Well, you're getting a lot of that nuance now because there are more voices in the mix. Okay, here's the last thing I want to bring up in terms of like why atheism is really changing for the better. The biggest thing is we have more allies than ever before. It used to be we were very much like black sheep of every family here, if you're an atheist, larger groups didn't want to be associated with you. A lot of you grew up in areas where like being an atheist was not something you wanted to tell anyone because it might have led to some sort of exclusion. But, I mean, how many of you remember those surveys? Like, atheists are the least electable group in America. Atheists are the least trusted. That was an actual survey that came out. We're not trusted. But we have more allies more than ever before. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that so many different groups, religious and non-religious, seem to be going against the same enemy, which is like religious extremism, Christian nationalism in the US. Look at these lawsuits. This is an amicus brief that was filed in the Dobbs decision before it was made. But this was an argument to keep Roe v. Wade in place. Look who signed on to this brief. This is from Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the American Humanist Association, a group called Bend the Arc, which is a Jewish partnership for justice, and the Interfaith Alliance. You have a coalition of religious, non-religious, church-state separation groups all saying, hey, all of us agree on the following arguments for why Roe v. Wade should stay in place. Now, we all know how that ended, but my point is, they're working together saying, I know you don't think we should be friends, but we are, and we all want you to see this case the way we do. Here's another case. This involved a Christian flag flying outside the Boston City Hall. And again, I just want to show you this. This is the amicus. This is a brief that was filed, I think, in the appellate court. But look who signed on to this brief saying, we agree with the following arguments as to why you should not allow Boston to fly this Christian flag. You have the Anti-Defamation League, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the Sikh Coalition. Oh, wait, there's a page 2. I'm just glancing. Hindu American Foundation, Men of Reform Judaism, National Council of Jewish Women, American Atheists, American Humanist Association. Again, all of these groups are saying we all have very different views about God, but all of us do not think Boston should be flying a Christian flag outside City Hall. That's the sort of partnership that I think would have been pretty much unimaginable more than a decade ago, because those other groups would not have wanted us to be working with them. They would not have wanted to be seen with us because they would have just done this on their own. And now, no, both sides are working together. They have coalitions. The lawyers for all the different atheist groups, they communicate with the lawyers for all the other groups too. They talk about this stuff regularly. They partner when they can. That's a huge difference. Here's what that looks like in practice too. This is a publication that was put out, I believe, earlier this year about the January 6th insurrection attempt and specifically its link to Christian nationalism. And here's what I want you to think about. This is the sort of thing that an atheist group may have put out a while back. They didn't do that here. In this case, they brought together the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, a couple of historians, and members of Congress. And the amazing thing is because of that, because all those people are working together, this got coverage. This is Religion News Service. They wrote about this report and the link between Christian nationalism and what happened. This is the Washington Post writing about how the Capitol attacks helped spread Christian nationalism. And this is fascinating. I don't know if you've seen the speech. Representative Jared Huffman, he's a congressman from California. He's the only openly humanist member of Congress. He gave a speech about this on the floor of the House. I just want you to think about this. When was the last time you can recall, especially in the past, hearing a speech like you're about to hear on the House floor? Let's see if we can get this to...
I rise today to bring attention to a dangerous ideology threatening our democracy. White Christian nationalism. Most members of Congress don't even know what it means, but experts from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty have studied it for years, and their new report shows this movement was at the heart of the January 6th insurrection. White Christian nationalism fuses Christianity with a rigid view of civic life, a view that true Americans are white, native-born, and conservative. On January 6th, it was the connective tissue that tied disparate groups together and propelled them to action. It's infecting our government, from members of Congress and top officials in the previous administration to the wife of a Supreme Court justice whose messages to the president's chief of staff leading up to the insurrection smacked of white Christian nationalism. Thankfully, good Americans, people of faith and non-believers, are standing up to this violent ideology. I call on members of Congress to educate themselves about white Christian nationalism and reaffirm the separation of church and state. I yield back.
How cool is that? Like, imagine if there were more than just one of him in Congress. But the point is, like, because these groups are working together, again, we're going from a group that is the least electable group in America to not only having a representative in Congress, but one who's willing to call out religious extremism on the floor of the House. That is something you would not have expected a while back. So that's not unimportant there. I would also say, like, a lot of the people who grew up in that new atheism movement, who started their activism in the world of atheism, they have now shifted gears too. This is fascinating. This is Sarah Blaine and Evan Clark, who were like board members of atheist organizations you have heard of. One of the things they do now is they support, like, they work as campaign officials trying to get non-religious candidates elected, because that's their, like, where they're going. This is Sarah Henry, who was on the board of the Secular Student Alliance, who's now running for state representative in Florida. Like, she won her primary. She's on the ballot next week. That's happening. And again, I want to stress this. This is important. None of these people are saying we want to get elected in order to promote atheism. They're just saying we happen to be people who are non-religious, but like any good politician, I don't care about party, like any good politician, they have the guts to say, yeah, I'm non-religious, but it shouldn't matter because I'm here to represent all of you, religious and non-religious, and I want to do things that are going to benefit all of my constituents, like you would hope any politician does. That's an important thing. I'll show you what that looks like in practice. There is a Nebraska state senator, Megan Hunt. In Nebraska, they don't do political parties. They just have their unicameral Senate. Everyone's a senator. And recently, over the summer, Nebraska was about to institute one of those trigger laws when it comes to abortion. They were all set to institute an anti-abortion law that, because of how it was worded, it was so extreme that it would have effectively banned IVF treatments, in vitro fertilization treatments, and criminalized doctors who treated an ectopic pregnancy. It was very, very extreme. And Nebraska is generally a conservative state. They had the votes to pass this. But they needed a supermajority of votes, which would be 33 of them, to override any filibuster. Megan Hunt, the senator I'm going to show you in a second, wasn't sure that they could override the filibuster, but she was dead set on trying to convince a couple of her legislative colleagues to support her. And I will say, she is someone who is openly atheist. She ran, like, they had a little, here's who's running for this seat, and they show Megan Hunt. Here's her profile. Religion, atheist. And I saw that, and I'm like, oh, no. She said that out loud. She doesn't know that this is bad. But really, she kind of said, like, oh, yeah, I'm an atheist. Let me tell you what I'm going to do for you if you vote for me. Like, she never made it an issue, and because of that, no one could really use it against her as an issue. She did get elected 4 years ago. Now she's in there. But what she's about to say, what she said on the floor over the summer is, if this IVF anti-abortion bill passes, she would use legislative maneuvers to basically hold hostage every other piece of legislation all her conservative colleagues wanted to pass in the final days of their session. That's the argument she's making, and these are two clips that I spliced together. I just want you to check out this, and again, tell me what you think about this in a second. Oh, come back. Work. Nope.
Everything that we can to make sure that this extreme abortion bill does not pass in Nebraska. Today, Christian religious extremists, let's call it what it is, are trying to pass a forced birth bill in Nebraska to cut off abortion services, including for victims of rape and incest and child abuse, with no exception for the life of the mother. It should worry us, colleagues, and it should worry us Nebraskans, how often we have to debate human rights and dignity, and how we have conceded that there's a debate to even have. The fact that my reproductive destiny, that my fertility, that my rights to control my own body, and every other woman in this chamber is even up for debate is something I can't believe we have conceded as a culture. When we talk about the rights of trans children to exist, that's not debatable. When we talk about reproductive rights and reproductive justice, that's not debatable. When we talk about marriage equality, that's not debatable. When we talk about the rights of immigrants to work and drive and go to the doctor, that's not debatable. Let people live, leave people alone, and trust people in Nebraska to do what's best for them and their families and their lives, and that we have even ceded that these questions are debatable should concern us all. Proponents of this bill have no shame left. I will cherish the time that I have worked here forever, but when I am term limited, I will probably not talk to most of you ever again. That's just reality. You're not my friends, you're my coworkers. If you think my 11-year-old should be forced to give birth, you are not my friend. Let me explain to you how it's going to go down if this bill moves forward today to select file. If this moves forward, the first thing that will happen is I'll open on a motion to indefinitely postpone the election law bill that's coming up next. If this bill moves, colleagues, that bill doesn't move. In life, sometimes we go through things where we have to draw a boundary. It is healthy for me as a mother, as a rape survivor, to draw a boundary and say, if you think that my child should be forced to give birth, you are not my friend. And if I go to the pearly gates and meet your God someday, which sounds great, I hope I do, I don't think I'm going to get in any trouble for killing all of your bills who vote for this. I don't think your God's going to have any problem with that. And I don't think I'm going to see any of you there either. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm not going to see any of you there either. The conservatives in her legislature could not get the 33 votes they needed to pass that bill. She was able to stop them from passing that abortion ban. Doesn't mean they're not going to try again. But this is the power of having someone in office that isn't interested in trying to speak nicely about religious people doing religious things. She's calling it out for what it is. I'll give you one last one here. This one's relatively short. This next one is Mallory McMorrow of Michigan. She was called a groomer by a Republican because of her support for LGBTQ people. And she is religious. But this is what she said famously. This went viral. This is what she said on her chamber floor.
I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom. I want my daughter to know that she is loved, supported, and seen for whoever she becomes. I want her to be curious, empathetic, and kind. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian.
It's passionate speech. She is religious, by the way, but again, not afraid to call out religion being used for bad things. I mean, the biggest takeaway here is the word atheist used to be like a bad thing. There are atheist politicians who are not afraid of that label anymore. There are like more than 60 or 70 of them on ballots next week. That never would have seemed plausible a couple decades ago. So I mean, in summary, it seems like atheist used to be an identifier. I think we're moving past that. I think it's almost for a lot of people, especially younger people, it's like, yeah, okay, you're atheist. I want to know what you're going to do with your beliefs, which ought to be the way we are judged, right? It ought to be the way religious people are judged too. Like, I don't care if you're religious, but what are you doing when you're inspired by your faith? And it seems like there's a lot of allies on our side when it comes to fighting religious extremism and religious bigotry. And like, if we want to argue theology or debate God's existence, like, that's fine. But it seems like we can also do that when we're off the clock and there are more pressing issues that we can work on together. I want to close with one last thing. I was trying to figure out if there's one way to show that our perception of God has changed, especially over the past couple of decades. Like, is there a way to show you that people are not as reverential, maybe, as they used to be when it comes to religion? And is there some tradition that has changed over the course of a while? And I was thinking, you know, one of my favorite things to do, like nerdy passion hobbies, is crossword puzzles. And that's about as old school traditional as you can get. And in the New York Times, which is like the granddaddy of all crossword puzzles, one guy, Will Shortz, has been like the head honcho of crossword puzzles since like 1993. He's still doing it today. But it's a very conservative, traditional publication. But here's the thing. If you write crossword puzzles, there's actually a database you can go to that's really helpful online that shows you, like, if I'm saying, I want to put the word A-N-D, and, in a puzzle, it's 3 letters. I can do a lot of things with a 3-letter word, but I wonder how it's been clued in the puzzle so that I'm not submitting a boring clue or something like that. There's a database where you could check every word that's been in the New York Times crossword puzzle for the past 30 years, every clue that's been used for that word for the past 30 years. It's fantastic. And I want to show you this. This is what happens when you search for the word God. And again, even if you know nothing about crossword puzzles, any 3-letter word, that's like the glue that holds a crossword puzzle together. You're gonna need 3-letter words. So God has been used in a lot of crossword puzzles. It has to. It's a small word. It's gonna be used. So this is how God has been clued from like 1993 to 1999. So like early on in that time. See if you could check, see if you could see this. You have things like praise be to blank, word on all US coins, Jupiter or Saturn, haha, look, they're getting clever. 4th word of the Bible, Mercury or Mars. They have the Almighty with a 4 after it because they've literally used the Almighty 4 different times to clue God. So that's back in the day. Let me show you how God has been clued over the past 5 years, just to show you how things are changing. Word in the Declaration of Independence, but not the Constitution. There is no blank higher than truth, Gandhi. One of 2 words added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. Thor or Loki. Like, they're way more fun and less like we have to be nice about this sort of clue. No, they can totally poke fun at the word in a way that you would not expect from a very conservative, traditional type of publication. And again, we could play this game for a whole bunch of different words. You could see that shift over time, which I just think shows like the work of activists and groups and atheists. Like, it has this long arc. It's hard to see it with all the day-to-day fights we all have, but like, that's why I'll leave it at that. That's kind of my reason for why I think things are getting better in the long term. If you have questions, if there are time for questions, I could take them. Otherwise, thanks to Jacob and everyone at Oasis for bringing me here. I appreciate you all coming here. There's my contact information if you want. Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you so much. All right, so what we're gonna do, since we did kind of get a start late, we're ending a little later, we're going to take a coffee break so that way anyone who does need to have a hard time limit and needs to leave, you can sneak out without feeling guilty. If you did have a question and you do need to go, we have a space on the back of your program where you can write your question and give it to Jacob in the back and we can ask Hemant. during the Q&A. So we will go ahead and take a Q&A, or a coffee break, come back for a Q&A.
Amber and we'll leave them on for a few seconds and see. Yeah. We'll leave them on for a few minutes and see. Away from it. Yeah. Batteries are still good. No, it was red. Okay. Just it might be like my remote at home. It turns red, but I keep on using it. Oh. Until I forget that it's like that, and then I wonder if the remote's red. Okay. I remember.
How you doing, fellas?
Mr. Will, good. Hi. Nice to see you both. Good, but not as well as you. Hey, did you go to the bar night last night?
I was in San Antonio for the FFRF convention. Yeah, so I rolled out of bed this morning.
Test. A little hot. There we go.
How's it
Hello?
going?
Hello, is this on? It's open mic morning. People, we have a wonderful musician with us right now, and I know he'd love to play for us, so if we can just be a little quiet, then we can keep going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. This is a song that brought me to Texas for the first time last year, and is thrilling to play in Texas whenever I play here. For many reasons. But I did the Kerrville Folk Festival, and this was the song that won it for me, the new folk competition, and it's a song called Saying Amen. You might get a kick out of it. This is an interesting audience to play with. I wrote it as a letter to someone. Got light blonde hair, skin like mine, married in 1990, 2 kids by 95, Bible by your bed, you swear Jesus knows your name, but don't think he doesn't see what you post online every day, and you say you love the good book, so why don't you take a good look at yourself? 'Cause there are people going through hell that we can't understand. Why don't you care about them? So go on, keep on saying amen. Got a good job now, you got there with your own hands. It's real easy to preach it when you don't have to understand that it's not saying your life's been easy or that you haven't worked for your blessings, but it hasn't been made harder by the color of your skin. And you say you love the good book, so why don't you take a good look at yourself? 'Cause there are people going through hell that we can't understand. Why don't you care about them? So go on, keep on saying amen. Amen now. Amen for my trans friends, brave for being alive. Amen for the Bible and for Jesus Christ. Amen for the women who shouldn't have to fight for their rights. Amen for the White House and the good people still inside. Amen. You say you love a good book, so Why don't you take a good look at yourself? 'Cause there are people going through hell that we can't understand. Why don't you care about them? So go on, keep on saying amen. Thank you. Thank you. That's unfortunately I have to rush out sort of because I have to drive all the way back to Nashville right now, but this is very sweet. Thank you for having me, and I'll be packing up my stuff, but there's some CDs and email list sign up and stuff back there, but yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you so
I
much.
appreciate it.
All right, we've got a few minutes for Q&A, so if Hemant Mehta would like to come back up to the mic. I am going to pass the mic around. We are running short on time, so please keep your questions as questions and not as comments or stories. And please wait for the microphone. That way everyone in the room and online can hear what your question is. So we'll get started right over here.
I was wondering if there was any data on how atheists identify politically, either left or right, and how that affects whether you're going to be more likely to support abortion.
Yeah, so how do atheists identify politically? Off the top of my head, because I don't have it in front of me, I mean, the vast majority identify as Democrats, more so than Republicans, Libertarians, or anything like that. Here's what may be interesting. With the help of the American Humanist Association, and just out of pure curiosity, I started keeping track of all the people running for state or federal office who are on the ballot, like they got through a primary, who are openly non-religious. Anyone who's explicitly said that in any way. How many do you think there are on the ballot for state house or state senate or Congress or anything? How many? 5-ish? There's I think more than 70 on the ballot across the country. Literally one of them is a Republican, which was still surprising to me. That person, I think he's from Idaho. Don't quote me on that. But basically it's one of those places where if you want any chance of getting elected, you're gonna come up through the Republican Party, and he's very much a libertarian type of spirit. But other than that, every single non-religious person on that spreadsheet is running as a Democrat. A lot of them are incumbents, they've already been elected. They're not all challengers. And I was just mentioning this earlier, only a small handful of them identify as atheists. There are on the list, and I will post this, I can show you this in a little bit. There are humanists on there, agnostics, spiritual but not religious, people who are just secular Jews. There's a whole number of things, they don't use the same word in any context. And some of that may be political strategy, some of that just may be this is how they identify, so be it. But in terms of how the rest of the community votes, it's almost all Democrats. It doesn't mean Republicans don't exist within the atheist community, but that's probably what you would predict, and that's what the numbers have shown. Now, here's the tricky thing. Evangelical Christians tend to vote for Republicans, but they tend to vote more within their, a higher percentage of evangelical Christians vote than Americans vote. They punch above their weight when it comes to voting. Atheists are less, or I should say nuns, atheists, agnostics, that 29% I mentioned earlier, we don't vote. We are not 29% of the voting population. We are under that as a group. So this is going to be one of those challenges in the future, which is if you want to take whatever atheist beliefs are, or church-state separation, or things like that, and make politicians pay attention to you, we need to show them as a community that we're a voting bloc worth supporting, because even though we're not a bloc, and even though there's no one gathering place you could find us, we do tend to vote in one direction more than others. And so this is one of the challenges. How do you convince politicians to take church-state separation and issues like that seriously, not a partisan thing, as an issue, seriously, but also there's no easy way for us to just say, here's where you could find all the atheists or something. That's kind of one of the downsides of all that. So right now, I think the thing I'm really curious about is whether any of these non-religious politicians, how many of them will get elected. I will tell you, I have yet to see any of those people I just mentioned, that 70-ish people on the ballot. Almost none of them have had their non-religiosity, which is public, used against them in a campaign. None of them. And some of them are running in red states. It just hasn't been an issue. It's easier to attack them for liberal values than it is to attack them for being an atheist, which is interesting. Did that answer your question? It's a lot. Right, so are you going to see more atheists who are in favor of abortion rights, things like that? I mean, virtually all the candidates I just mentioned who are on the ballot, yeah, they're running as pretty liberal people on all those issues. There are a handful of conservative atheists who are either running for office. One guy in New York just made a sex tape. He's an atheist. There are all these people who are not necessarily on the liberal side of everything. But again, the question is, how do you turn their non-religiosity into something that is a political strategic force? We haven't done a good job of that as a community in showing politicians why they should pay attention to us. White evangelical Christians have done a remarkable job of all of that, saying, no, if you want our vote, you better do what we say on these issues. And you could see that in the way politicians talk about those issues. How do we challenge that in a meaningful way? That's a tough call. Because again, there are no leaders. There are no single communities you could go to find all the atheists. So that is a challenge. It's hard to overcome that. But yeah. Other questions?
When the news talks about people leaving the church, they usually show large, mostly white, evangelical type churches. How about other communities, African Americans, Hispanics? Are there numbers leaving this church as well?
Yeah, so we usually see white evangelicals or Southern Baptists leaving the church. That's what the news focuses on. Are other communities leaving as well? I don't have the numbers in front of me for this one, but in terms of are African Americans becoming less religious? The answer is yes. Part of that is not surprising because they were so overwhelmingly religious as a group that it could only really go in one direction. But those numbers are rising. Ex-Muslims, you are seeing more people, immigrants, becoming less religious. I would struggle to tell you any demographic of people, any demographic group that is becoming more religious over time. Virtually all of them seem to be leaving. I wish the media would focus on some of those other communities, but what ends up happening is, let's say the Mormon church does something that angers a lot of people, let's say anti-gay, that angers a lot of people even in their community. All of a sudden you see a small bump of an exodus away from the church, or someone saying, you need to fill out paperwork to leave the church. I will help you do that. And then you see an article about that maybe, but they haven't really focused. There's so many stories about different groups of people leaving their religious communities. It's not always easy to talk about it, but those stories are out there. They do exist. I wish they would get more of a focus, but I think the reason a lot of those white evangelical churches get the bulk of the attention, that's where the power is at. So when people are walking away from that, people pay attention.
All right, we've got time for one last question that I've got here. Are you also optimistic about the future of scientific literacy and critical thinking? I've not seen many surveys about it, but anecdotally, I rarely see atheists explain their non-religiosity in terms of skeptical scrutiny like Hawkins and Tyson did. It's usually more like religion does bad things like XYZ.
Right, right. So are we getting better with science and critical thinking? That's a tough one because it depends on which area we are talking about. Like, the upside is there are more people than ever, more sources than ever who are giving good, awesome information about science, about critical thinking, but there are so many other ways you can get bad information, and it's so easy to spread it that it's going to become a new challenge. I mean, maybe a couple decades ago, you would see, like, why is creationism in the news? Why is that getting into our schools? And it was always coming from a couple of sources, and you could see what their textbooks were like and where it was coming from. But if you want to talk about, like, vaccine misinformation, it's coming in so many different forms from so many different places that the challenge is not like a lack of people giving good information. In fact, that's better than ever. It's that there's so much like crap clogging up the system. I am worried about that. Like, how do we break through the noise and get that good information to people? It takes like a re-education of how we tell people to find good information from bad. That's a different type of challenge than the one that we've been talking about here for religion. It's a good question, though.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please feel free to message me if you have any other questions.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Really appreciate it. Thank you for staying with us a little later. I did want to let you know about a couple of upcoming events. We have our weekly Houston Oasis Cards group. Every Wednesday, you can contact Richard Andrews for more information. Saturday, November 5th, there is a bicycle ride. They're meeting at Baldwin Park. And just bring your attention, Sunday, November 27th. Sunday, November 27th, we're going to be doing our Thanksgiving brunch here. So keep in contact with us on the email list, Facebook, Meetup, how you keep in contact there. And before we let you all go enjoy the rest of this lovely Sunday, Richard Andrews has one last thing.
This will be no more than half an hour. No, I'm the treasurer, so if you have an opportunity, drop a little love in the black hat back there. We have other ways of giving, also more modern ways of giving. If you're not able to give or you have other less worthy charities, then that's understandable. We just love having you here, and thank you so much.
Go enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you do, people are meeting at, do want to join us for lunch, people are going to Kandahari Afghan Restaurant, 5626 Hillcroft. Information is in your bulletin. Have a great week. Have fun.
Thank you so much for that question. Let's